Hello again. Now we are in section 2, which is confidence and trust. Um, Confidence and trust. All right. So the first one is a 3-part question. So I am going to do one question each at a time because that makes the most sense to me. Okay. First of the 3-part question: how do you encourage students to workshop their work if they do not want to share their work with anyone? Would you still give them a grade even if you have not seen their work? What grade would you give them for workshop if they do not participate? Okay. In my class, workshopping is, or at least sharing the work with the professor or the teacher, is so important that you can't actually, I would say you can't get out of the class successfully without doing it. Um, that's the parameters of my class. Now, I've almost never had this happen. Um, in the past, this is a long time ago, if I've dealt with a student who is, for one reason or another, cannot bear to share work um, with the other students, they at least have to share it with me. Um, if they can't do that, then this is not a workshop class. If you're, I realize that if you teach K-12, you may not have um, the leeway to just say, well, you should drop this class. But I think you do have the leeway to say you haven't done what was specified in the class, which is share your work with others. Um, and if you don't do that, you're going to get a 0. Um, you have to set up the points of the class so that a student really can't pass without workshopping, unless you think it's okay that they pass without workshopping. But I really think workshopping and sharing with others is so important as a writer. It's where you meet your audience, and having that audience can help them learn so much about writing audience-based prose as opposed to and poetry, as opposed to prose and poetry that is only geared toward them. They have to start to learn about their audience. Now, if they're still like paralyzed by the idea of doing this, I think you have to dig a little deeper, find out if they've got any mental health issues that are making them really scared, or they've had a bad experience that's making them scared. Find out what the issue is going on here, why they're so scared to do this. And then try to work around that. But if they ultimately can't do it, I would say that is a main component of the class that they're not able to meet. How do you choose which text to share with students to help them best understand the writing process? Would you choose poems or fiction that you like to read, work from current or past authors, work that you are familiar with, even if you don't like it, etc.? Well, I like to choose poems, fiction, other prose that engages the students right where they are. That I understand that students like to read and enjoy reading, but it isn't necessarily something that they're reading right now, because many of my students are great, actually extracurricular readers, but I want them to read a little bit different stuff when they come to my class. Not necessarily the canonized classics, just different from what they've been reading. Um, in choosing which text to share with my students, I really try to give them a lot of choice. I might, show them 3 different essays and ask them to choose the one that they want to analyze or talk about in class, so that they have some choice in the matter, because choice gives students ownership. What I've often done, like for example, in understanding the writing process, I will have a list of books about writing and the writing life, right? And 10 books that I've approved, that I've vetted ahead of time. Then I ask the students over the course of the semester to pick a book from this list that looks interesting to them, read it, and then present a book review on it. This could be just standing up in front of the class, it could be a PowerPoint, it could be a vlog, it could be any number of things, but present on that book to the class in a way that helps your classmates understand whether or not they would want to read it and learn from it. This really gives students an eye onto all the different writing process books that are out there and what ones they might like to read and enjoy. Again, it gives them that choice. I still will have class books that we'll read, some of which are textbooks about writing. One of my favorite books is called The Practice of Creative Writing by Heather Sellers. She's a wonderful, down-to-earth writer. She uses very, very current examples. Her writing, her teaching of creative writing is very concept based. So it's not like, oh, now we're going to do poetry, now we're going to do fiction. Instead, it's like these are all concepts of creative writing, detail, tension, rhythm, that are important to any kind of writing. So we're going to look at the concept and then you can apply it to different genres as you see fit. So that's another thing that you can do in choosing texts. That is just a great book for doing that. And then in terms of, I was going to actually teach like poetry or fiction. By the way, The Practice of Creative Writing has a great anthology in the back. Very current stuff, like current in the last 10 or 20 years. And I think that's really important. But to find out what engages them and what they think of as really good writing, and then try to engage them with writing like that. I would ask them, my icebreaker at the beginning of the semester is tell the class and tell me about, and this is when I do this in my online class, but I have them talk about it in a non-online class. Tell me about 7 books that have had an impact on you and why. My students, I'm always impressed with the list they come up with. I get ideas on books from them, but I get a sense of where the readers of where the class is coming from in terms of what they read. So I get a sense of what they're reading and then what might engage them throughout the semester. I might ask them, bring in some examples to the class about that's really good writing that you'd like to show everybody else. And it could be a piece of fiction, it could be a blog post, it could be, a social media post, it could be a poem that they read. I just want to know where they're coming from. And then if I can get them to talk about why they think it's good writing, then that's half of the battle of learning that, oh, this is something that was how do we think this person wrote this? What else can we find out about this author? All of those things will help understand the writing process. I've taught things, this is the end of the question, that I didn't like, or not so much that I didn't like, but that I didn't love, but I felt the students would get something out of. But I do try to teach what I think will engage them. Oh, any exercises that you recommend for students to build trust that is not only sharing expectations for a workshop? I know I wrote a lot about that in that article, but I've done a lot more since then on building trust in the classroom, because I've learned that it's probably the most important thing you can do, and especially for a creative writing classroom, is to build a sense of community. And what we do, like I've done this a couple different ways, but before the pandemic, I mostly did something called the question of the day, and I would come into class and I took attendance with a certain question that helped the class to get to know each other. I did this all semester. It might be something like, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid? To what's your favorite movie candy, to what's your favorite group, music group, that kind of thing. It could be that. I mean, after a while, I start, and I have to keep this list. I will get to the point where I'm like running out, and I'll say, does anybody have some ideas for question of the day? But this is great because they start to bond over this. It doesn't take that long. It takes the exact same amount of time as taking attendance, and they start to bond over this. They start to realize, hey, you liked watching, uh, gosh, you liked watching SpongeBob too. You and I have something in common that I didn't realize. Or you liked Twizzlers too. Or, your favorite, holiday is X. I mean, it sounds kind of silly at first, but if all they have to do is say it instead of their name or here. What's your favorite movie candy? Sour Patch Kids, Twizzlers. I mean, that's just starting to break down barriers. I did that for years. And students, if I forgot to do the question of the day, they would ask for it. They would say, we forgot the question of the day. They love it. They love it. And it is a great way for them to get to know each other. After the pandemic, I started getting really into, well, not so much the pandemic, although certainly it was important for students to be getting to know each other. But after reading Felicia Rose Chavez's book, The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, I wanted to get even more into the class, understanding where everyone else was coming from. And so what I started doing instead of the question of the day was the check-in. And I've been doing that ever since. So I've been doing that since around 2021. We start every class. My way of taking attendance is to say, check-in. How you doing? Students have all kinds of options to answer this. They could say, I'm fine. What I often get is, fine, I'm just tired. Or I'm doing really good. Or, I'm okay. Or, I just got this new job and it's a lot of hours. Or, oh, I just finished my psychology test take home and I think I did really well on it. Or, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this French class. To things like, they can say as much as they want to say or as little as they want to say. And it is a great way for the class to really get to know each other. It takes not much more than taking attendance. This is like a sentence or two. And it's really a great way to help students build trust and to build a camaraderie with one another that makes them willing to trust each other and be vulnerable on the page. It's not writing, but it is a form of sharing. And so that really starts to break down the fear of sharing, because after a week or two of doing this in the beginning of the semester, they just are just like, well, these are all people I know. And these are all people who have good days and bad days. We all struggle. I usually share with them as well. So, and I share I might say, I'm doing great. It's raining today. I love rain. Or, oh my gosh, today was crazy and I'm still trying to collect myself. Last year we were trying to sell our house and it was a very up and down process. And which, I mean, ultimately turned out okay, but it was a real roller coaster. And I would come in and say, well, here's how I'm doing. We're trying to sell our house and we just had, the people who had written an offer just backed out. And, so that's how I'm feeling today. I mean, I don't really elaborate, but they know that sometimes things are great and sometimes they're not. Without belaboring it. It has worked great. And also, I just feel like I get to know them really well, too. I love learning that they did great on a psychology test. And I also like knowing when they're struggling with something. So honestly, I really recommend that. Okay, so question 2 in confidence and trust. So this is the second question. I appreciate you pointing out that many of the perceived barriers to teaching creative writing are fallacies, but there's one I struggle to overcome. In many non creative genres of writing, I acknowledge the oxymoron here, there's usually opportunity for students to create without necessarily exposing themselves emotionally. In a course that is not focused specifically on creative writing, particularly a course that all students take on a high school or college campus or are required to take, an instructor must take steps to foster an environment that students feel safe, lowering emotional barriers. Um, and then the writer says, I asked this as a teacher of ninth graders. Getting to know their classmates reveals that many have their defenses up for good reason. This is a situation. Oh, wait, let me finish the question. Well, I'd love to show just any student who doesn't live up to behavioral standards to the door, admin is not going to be thrilled. What advice can you provide about encouraging creative writing in a space that might not be as safe as we'd like it? Is it worth it to let students dip their toes in the pool and gain meaningful experiences? Or does that cheapen the process? I think, again, some of the safety, it sounds like with ninth graders, you might start with the question of the day and see how that goes, and maybe not take that too much further. I mean, they'll still learn a lot just from the question of the day about one another, and maybe they'll start to learn to be a little more tolerant of one another. But if they start to seem mature enough with question of the day, then you could take it to a check-in. Again, with a check-in, students can say, I'm fine, or I'm not great. And you don't have to probe them on that. Just say, okay, not great. Sorry. I'm sorry you're not having a great day. You don't have to probe them on that, or sometimes they will share. So there's that builds a sense of trust and community, but there's also allowing them to do a lot of writing that is not necessarily shared. To also do writing that's for themselves, that you will see, maybe just briefly, or you'll see that they've done it, but it's really, the point of it is to be expressive, not necessarily to be reading for understanding. All writing starts this way. We start out writing stuff that we don't want anyone to see. And so there should be an element of the class that allows that as well, whether it's a journal or whatever, that they're allowed to do a certain amount of writing that they don't have to share, but they do have to do it. In my course shell, Blackboard, they keep a journal, and I literally just go in and count the pages. I don't really read it because that's really for them. So they should have some ownership and be able to write some things that are just for them. And that will be meaningful. You do have to make sure they do it, if that's counting or whatever. Now, in the age of AI, yes, they can just do that as AI and turn it in, but the point of doing this, and I would explain this to them, is that this is for them to express themselves. If they use AI to do it, how are they really learning? What I used to say before AI, and I had them journaling, this is your opportunity, or writing exercises, not necessarily just journaling. This is your opportunity to practice, to try things, and nobody's going to be looking over your shoulder. And they'd be like, well, what if I could do anything. What if I copy passages from a book? I'm like, well, that's kind of defeating the purpose, because you're not really experimenting. But I still think you'll learn something copying a passage over from a book. I actually think you'll learn something from that, not copying and pasting. I meant like retyping or whatever. So, if you explain to them, look, the point is for you to get something out of this. If you choose to let someone else do the writing and the thinking for you, then you won't. So, that defeats the purpose. I would set up all of these different opportunities as ways for them to learn about all the different aspects of writing, from creating a safe space to writing just for themselves in ways that will give them material to then write for others. All of this is part of the writing process. Okay, number 3. I enjoyed reading your attacks on myths related to creative writing, specifically the idea that most beginning writing classes are simply collections of people at different stages of practice and experience, and that talented writers are so because of experience, not because they're born with a gift. However, I have quite a few students who lack confidence in their own writing, and I teach a few students who are on educational plans to receive more support for writing due to lower levels. What are some ways I could help them build confidence in their own abilities? Here, here I would really focus in class, whether in this kind of class where you have students who are this kind of level, or even at where you're in a class where you have some students who haven't been writing long and some students who have been writing a long time. I would suggest like really praising risk taking and the effort and being creative over something that sounds really polished and finished. Um, I mean, honestly, I would say, wow, instead of saying things like, wow, that sounds great. Wow, I can't believe that that's your first draft. Or this is sharing in class. Or when students read aloud, I would say, wow, that's so creative. Or I love that line. Or what a risk you took. This is really ambitious. Um, I would almost never focus on the finished quality of something, or that, I'd try not to say that that's really great, because great is going to sound like you're praising something for things that are outside the writer's control. But what's inside the writer's control is how much effort they put in, how much risk that they took. Like, wow, you just wrote a poem when you haven't written a poem all semester. Wow, that what a risk you took. Way to go. Um, so I think, or even, you wrote a paragraph when you usually write a sentence or two. Wow, way to go. I especially love this one line. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is when students are sharing, is to just let them share and say, okay, we're going to share in this class and we're not going to say anything afterward. We're just going to, everyone's going to get the snapping or whatever. And we're not going to say, that was good. In fact, I mean, what you might even want to tell students is, we're going to just listen to what everyone shares and we're not going to comment at all. And then we're just going to go around the room. And that way, we're not passing any value judgment. We're just accepting what they're giving. I think a student, I think you have to know your students to know if that would work. Another thing that I do when I workshop with my students, and I've just started doing this semester, is a thing at the beginning of the workshop called pointing. This has been working wonderfully. Everyone who comes in to workshop a particular student's work is responsible for having pulled a word, a phrase, an image, or something out of that piece that they will share to the class. And we go around the room and everyone just shares that one thing. It comes with nothing preceding or following it. I might say, ooh, mm-hmm, or something like that. People kind of murmur and agree, but each person says, and it actually, by the time it goes all the way around the room, it sounds quite lovely. To hear what people are pulling out of this piece that struck them or impacted them. It may be a really nice line, or it may be just a line they think is funny or interesting. It's great for students to hear that. It really builds their confidence. And notice I'm not saying, if I'd like to hear, what pieces you found, interesting from this workshop piece. I'm saying you have to find something that strikes you from this, and you have to say it in class. Starting out that way at the very beginning of the workshop is wonderful. It just creates a great stage. I've only been doing this for a year now, and I'm loving it. and I will keep doing it. It just, the mood it creates is wonderful. And imagine if you're the writer who's being workshopped and you just hear your words going around the room. It's just really lovely. Okay. Let's see. Oops. I especially love your point that creatives aren't born but trained and fostered just like any other skilled person. You point out that making it as a writer has just as much to do with perseverance and determination as it does talent. At my school district, we often discuss resiliency and how to teach our students that it's fine, good even, to make mistakes. What further suggestions do you have for teachers who wish to foster perseverance, determination, and resiliency? That's a great question. I think honestly, praising perseverance and determination is really the most important thing we can do. I mostly, even at the undergraduate level in class, I have really wonderful students, but they're definitely at the stage where they're more creative than finished. And they're having all these great ideas that they're trying to realize on the page, and they don't always do it. I could pick apart that piece, or lead the class in doing that, but I really just want to focus on how, wow, I'd never thought of this idea before of this kind of a story. And you tried it. That's amazing. And you're just at the beginning of working on this. Keep working on it. Here are some questions we have, right? So really focusing on praising the work. Wow, you must have really, worked a long time on this story or on this poem, or this is something really different for you. How interesting. It must have been hard to write something so completely different um, from what you're used to succeeding with. As much as you can praise that perseverance. That's what my class really is all about, is taking those risks. So we've gone in my class to kind of much more talking about work as being in process, as being finished, which means that the class will start saying, well, what if you did this? And what if you did that? And this is all for the writer to think about. They don't have to do any of it, but it suggests the idea that we're all just working on this, and it eventually will we're working on our own projects. They'll eventually get to the point where they're more finished than others. But what's really important is the time that we put into that, not how finished it seems at the end. We want it to seem finished at the end, but I want to encourage my students to bring into workshop things that are more unfinished, not close to being finished. So I no longer would say, oh, you need to send this somewhere right now. It's so good. I don't want to do that, because I don't want the rest of the students to think, oh, well, I have to submit something that's almost finished. I don't want them to do that. I want them to submit something that that was a lot of work for them, and they tried a lot of new things, and we can talk about how well that succeeded and what worked really well and what they might try next time. Okay, let's see. Okay, so that was section, oops, sorry about that. That was section 2. I'm going to stop this video now and move on to section 3. Amazingly, my dog has slept through the entire thing, but she's a sweetie and she's a good sleeper. Okay, I will see you in section 3.